Recording 1.
And our next caller is Karen. Karen, what's your experience of public transport?
Yes, hello, Gary. Well, I commuted to London for over 10 years. I caught the train every morning at 7:15 to get to work for 9 o'clock, and I wouldn't get home until about 7 o'clock in the evening. And frankly, it was a terrible period of my life, really stressful, mainly because of the unreliability of the train service. I was forever arriving late for work. One day, I was travelling home when the train broke down, and I eventually got back at midnight. Of course, I had to go to work the next day, so off I went for my 7:15 train. I'd been waiting over an hour when they announced that the train was cancelled. That really was the end for me. I arranged with my employer to work at home, and I've been working at home happily for the last 5 years. Of course, it meant a big salary cut, but I haven't regretted it for a moment.
Thanks for that, Karen. Can you just stay on the line? I'm hoping we've got Dave on the line. Dave, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Gary.
Great. And what point do you want to make?
Well, I just wanted to say that my experience is similar to your last caller, although I'm a newcomer to commuting by public transport. I've just sold my car, and now I go to work by bus. I'd owned a car ever since I left college, but I wanted to do my bit to cut down on pollution. But I have to confess that I'm regretting it already. I've arrived late for work twice this week because the bus hasn't turned up on time. It's got so bad that I'm now thinking of buying a motorbike. It'll cause less pollution than a car and be more reliable than public transport.
Well, it sounds like you're another dissatisfied customer, Dave. But we've also got Beryl on the line, and I think she's more positive. Beryl, are you there?
I am, Gary. Good afternoon.
Hello, Beryl. What do you want to tell us?
Well, I'd like to put in a good word for train travel. I'm working at home while our office block is being renovated, and while I'm appreciating being able to get up later than usual, I really miss my daily commute. You get to know the people you travel with every day. I remember one day I dropped my purse while I was getting off the train. Another passenger picked it up, found my address in it, and brought it round to my house later that evening. Another time, I'd been working really hard and went to sleep and missed my station. One of the other passengers was getting off at the next station, and she had her car parked there. She woke me up and offered me a lift back to my home. I'd spoken to her only a couple of times before then, but now she's a really good friend. You meet a lot of nice people and become a part of the travelling community.
Thanks, Beryl. That's a side of commuting we don't often hear about. Now, somebody else who sees the good side of train journeys, Keith. Are you there, Keith?
Yes, indeed. Actually, I'm phoning from the train on my way home from work.
And are you having a good journey?
Yes, it's been fine. But then I love trains. I've enjoyed travelling by train ever since I was young. I admit that it can be frustrating at times. There are delays and cancellations, and there are minor irritations like poor mobile phone reception. I've been trying to phone in to your programme for the last half hour, in fact. But I catch the 7:05 at the station near my home every morning, and still find there's something quite magical about stepping onto the train. And there are clear advantages over driving, apart from the lack of stress. I reckon that over the years, I've saved a huge amount of money by using public transport. I've never really considered buying a car. You can also get a lot of work done. On the train, yesterday morning, for example, I'd read a couple of reports and prepared for an important meeting before I even got to work. Admittedly, I'm quite lucky. The train company I travel with have invested a lot of money recently. They've bought new trains and have really improved the service.
Gary?
Karen, were you wanting to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to pick up Keith's point that travelling by train is less stressful than driving. Public transport can be stressful too when trains don't turn up or are delayed. What's less stressful is working at home. At 8 o'clock, I'm usually having a leisurely breakfast when most people are in their cars or on the train. Yesterday, I'd finished all my work by 2:30, so I drove to the local pool for a swim. And today, I've been working hard all day, so now I've got time to relax by listening to the radio for a while. Much better than the stress of commuting.
You're very lucky, Karen. We've got another caller on the line.
Recording 2.
You must be really looking forward to going to America. When are you actually leaving?
I'm flying on the 15th of July. I'm spending a few days sightseeing in New York, and then I arrive in Los Angeles on the 20th. Lectures start on the 27th of July.
Oh, sounds great. And what about accommodation?
Well, first, I'm going to stay with Don and Suzanne, some friends of my parents.
You're not staying with them the whole time you're there, are you?
No, I'll be looking for my own place. But I'm really pleased they'll be around. It'll be good to know I can contact them in case I have any problems. They're meeting me at the airport too. Mind you, I haven't seen them for years. They'll have forgotten what I look like.
And what about the course?
It looks really interesting. They sent me a reading list, but of course I haven't got round to opening any of the books yet. So it's going to take a long time to catch up. I'll be studying really hard during the semesters so that I don't have to do much work in the vacations.
And when does the first semester end?
The 7th of December. Then I'm going to San Francisco for a week. I've always wanted to see the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm going to fly up there if it's not too expensive.
Do you know when you'll be back in Los Angeles?
Probably mid-December. So you can come any time after that.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to it. I've always wanted to go to the States. I was going to see my aunt in Seattle a couple of years ago, but I cancelled the trip because she got ill.
Will you stop over anywhere on the way out? Maybe New York or Chicago?
I haven't really thought about it, but I've only got 3 weeks, so I think I'll fly directly to Los Angeles.
Fine, and I'll meet you at the airport, of course. By the time you come, I'm sure I'll have got to know LA really well, so I'll be able to show you all the sights.
Yes, I suppose you will. When I come to see you, you'll have been living in California for nearly 6 months.
Hard to imagine, isn't it? After Los Angeles, I thought we could go down to a place called Huntington Beach. If you bring your tent, we'll camp there for a few days. The weather will still be quite warm, even in the winter.
Isn't it your birthday around then?
That's right. I'll be 21 on the 2nd of January.
Wow, that'll be a really good way to celebrate.
The best. I'll need to get back to Los Angeles for when the second semester starts. But you'll be staying longer, won't you?
That's right. I don't have to be back in England until later.
Well, why don't you go to the Grand Canyon? It's supposed to be spectacular.
Yeah, I might think about that. Anyway, as soon as I book my tickets, I'll let you know.
OK. We can sort out the details closer to the time.
Fine. Oh, look, it's nearly 2 o'clock. If I don't go now, I'm going to be late for my next lecture. I'll text you.
Yeah, see you.
Recording 3A.
And now, on Radio Nation, it's 8:30, and here's a summary of the latest news. Air passengers could be hit badly today as cabin crews stay at home in the latest in a series of one-day strikes. The major airlines are warning that up to 100,000 people may experience delays. The managing director of Travel Air, David Wade, had this warning to the unions.
I'm sure I don't need to spell out the chaos being caused in the airline industry as a result of these strikes, and I would like to apologise to all our customers. However, the cabin staff must accept the new working conditions if the airline is to compete, and the management has no choice but to stand firm on this issue.
But he didn't have to wait long for a response. A union spokesperson said, "I can't believe Mr. Wade is being so confrontational. We will not be bullied by management. Eventually, the airlines will have to return to the negotiating table." Up to 200 teachers and pupils had to be evacuated from Northfield Primary School in South Wales today after a fire broke out in an adjacent building. Although firefighters were able to bring the fire under control fairly quickly, they couldn't prevent the fire damaging the school's sports centre. The head teacher said it might be a number of months before the sports centre is back in operation, although the school itself should be able to reopen early next week. The new Borland Bridge, connecting the island to the mainland, was officially opened today by the Transport Minister. However, it's been in operation for a few weeks already and has received a mixed reception from islanders. From Borland, here's our reporter, Anna Curtis.
Yes, the new bridge has stirred up a lot of strong emotion on Borland, and I'm here to gather the views of some of the island's residents. Excuse me, what do you think of the new bridge?
I think it will be of great benefit to the island. We used to be terribly isolated here because the ferry service was so bad. It's only a short distance, but the crossing would take over an hour at least. It could be a very rough journey too. Many passengers would get seasick during the crossing.
Excuse me, I'm asking people about the effects of the new bridge. They reckon that tourism on the island is set to expand.
Is that such a good thing? There are already far too many cars and people. We'll also get wealthy people from the mainland who can afford second homes. That will push up house prices and islanders won't be able to buy properties. That can't be right, surely. There ought to be restrictions on the number of people moving here.
It's certainly true that the bridge is going to have a major impact on the way of life of the people here over the next few years. But whether that will be a positive or negative effect, only time will tell.
Following her report on the high levels of obesity among children, the government's chief health advisor, Professor Carmen Brady, has said that schools have to play a more active role in encouraging children to take up sports. She has also criticised parents.
Parents needn't be very interested in sport themselves, but they should give their children whatever encouragement they can. While we were gathering information for our report, we found that some parents will actually discourage their children from taking up a sport on the basis that they might get distracted from their academic studies. This negative attitude to sport mustn't be allowed to continue, not if we're to get on top of the obesity crisis facing the country.
And finally, the weather. Well, if you're in the south of the country, you shouldn't be troubled by any rain today. It will be warm, sunny and dry, with temperatures up to 22 degrees Celsius. However, in the north, you're likely to see an occasional shower, with maximum temperatures of around 15 degrees. Radio Nation News.
Recording 3B. You will hear 3 different extracts. For questions 1 to 6, choose the answer A, B or C, which fits best according to what you hear. Extract 1.
Research shows that the optimum time to start music education is between the ages of 3 and 4. As well as improving manual dexterity and concentration, it seems that it may help emotional development too. The piano is the instrument that many parents want their children to start learning, and I think 3 years old is the right time to start.
Personally, I don't think the piano is the best instrument to start with so early. Children have to show the mental, physical and emotional readiness to learn an instrument like the piano, which obviously takes a lot of effort and commitment. In my experience, very few children under 6 are able to take on that kind of challenge. Starting early is vital, yes, but less demanding instruments would be my choice. Things like the recorder or a half-size guitar.
No, I think children of that age can learn to play simple tunes on the piano, and they soon progress to more complicated pieces. And starting young on understanding musical notation lays down an excellent foundation for later on.
But a rather academic approach like that will turn children off for life if they're not ready for it. Enjoyment has got to be the priority.
Well, enjoyment is certainly important.
Extract 2.
So, Ben, you're well known in the climbing world as a bit of a loner. You prefer climbing without other people. Is that true?
Well, to some extent. I've always talked to other climbers about the technical side of things, training, equipment, and things like that. But at the end of the day, you've got to learn independently through trial and error. If you're climbing in a group, you'll always compare yourself to others, and that doesn't always help you to improve. It's good to admire other climbers, but different things work best for different people.
So you never climb with other people?
As far as possible, I climb alone, but occasionally I look to others for support. When I was younger, I used to do most of my climbing during the summer holidays, and I haven't done much winter climbing, so I still feel out of my depth climbing alone on icy rock faces. In those conditions, you need people who've been brought up with it. It's good to have people around to advise you on what's a safe manoeuvre to make in the conditions.
Extract 3.
You're such a household name. It must be terrifying for staff when you go into a restaurant. How do they react?
It's true that a lot of people know me, at least in the restaurant world, so I always eat with a friend, and they'll make the booking. Often, though, I get recognised, and when that happens, it's inevitable, I suppose, that they take a bit more care over serving the food. I've never been offered complimentary wine, though, or anything like that.
Oh.
That would be just too obvious. And, of course, it could be considered unethical to accept a gift like that.
And what makes a good restaurant?
A good restaurant is one where the management and waiting staff have given some thought to why their customers are there. Most restaurant owners believe that the main reason people go to restaurants is for the food, but that's completely wrong. The main reason people go to restaurants is to have a good time, not because they're hungry. So there might be a big difference between the priorities of a restaurant and the priorities of diners. For example, one thing that a restaurant gets judged on is the quality of service. What restaurant owners think is good is service that is efficient, but what customers have as their priority is friendly service.
Recording 4.
So how on earth did they manage to get in? There's no sign of a forced entry.
Well, I suppose they could have got in through a window up on the 4th floor.
But no one would have dared climb up the outside of the building. Anybody trying to do that would have been seen from the street below. You don't think they would have been able to jump from the block across the road, do you?
No, it's much too far. Of course, there's always the fire escape around the back of the building. They could have climbed up there reasonably easily, and after that they might have been lowered by rope from the roof. If that was the case, people living in the block of flats behind the museum might have seen something. So we need to talk to them.
Right. But we needn't interview everyone in the block, just the people who have windows facing the museum. I'll arrange that.
If it wasn't a window, the only other possibility is that they went in through the front door. Perhaps they forced the lock, but the door didn't appear to be damaged at all.
And the entry code is supposed to be known only by the security guard.
So someone else must have opened the door from the inside?
Only the security guard was allowed to stay in the museum after it closed. Do you think they somehow persuaded him to let them in? Maybe they just knocked on the front door and he opened it.
He surely wouldn't have done something as stupid as that. Do you think he might have been expecting them and that he was part of the gang?
But then, why would they have attacked him?
I don't know. But we'd better find out all we can about that guard as soon as possible. Now, who was it that raised the alarm?
It was the head cleaner who went into the building early this morning. He must have to know the entry code too.
Yes, maybe. He says the front door was unlocked when he got here, but he claims he didn't see anything else unusual until he got to the 4th floor. But of course he might be lying.
Yes, he must know he ought to have called the police as soon as he found the door open. I wonder why he didn't. I think we should talk to him again. I suppose he could be hiding some information from us, and he might be prepared to tell us more if we put a bit of pressure on him.
The other puzzling thing is how they took the paintings away. Apparently they're very big, so the robbers must have had to bring a van around to the front of the building.
The driver must have been waiting nearby and drove up when they'd got the paintings. They could have loaded the paintings up very quickly and might have driven straight to a port or airport. Anyway, the forensic team should have finished examining the building by now. Once they've done that, I think we should go and look around ourselves.
Recording 5.
Right. Perhaps you could tell me something about how you got interested in environmental science and what experience you have in the subject.
Well, I've always been fascinated by plants and animals. And then last year, a friend of mine, Mike Proctor, invited me to Brazil. He's the head of a project there run by a European charity. The charity's aim is to help groups of villagers set up their own schools and medical centres. They also encourage sustainable agriculture and the setting up of businesses to sell local handicrafts. Anyway, it was during my stay that I really began to understand the impact of climate change. I want to learn more about this, and more generally how decision-making on environmental issues in one part of the world can affect the lives of individuals elsewhere.
You say you began to understand the impact of climate change. Could you give me an example of what you saw in Brazil that influenced you?
Yes, of course. We've all heard about the destruction of the rainforest, and I was able to see examples of that. But also people don't realise that the climate in the region is changing, and that the speed of change is frightening. There's been a drought there for a number of months, and river levels are low. I had direct experience of this when I travelled with Mike. Having responsibility for the whole project in the area means that his job involves travelling to some pretty remote areas. Sometimes we had to go by boat to get to some of the villages, and we had to carry the boat because there wasn't enough water in the river.
And is this change affecting the lives of local people?
A huge amount. The main problem has been the effect of the drought on food supplies. The majority of people there are farmers, and all of them have lost animals and crops. The charity's project has been a success so far in that levels of income from the sale of handicrafts have increased. But of course, financial success isn't everything. It's hard to imagine a future without farming in an area like that.
Your trip to Brazil sounds like an amazing experience. And since you've been back, have you done anything to develop your interest in the area?
Yes, I've read a book about energy conservation and how this might slow down climate change. And I was particularly interested in how the Netherlands has begun to tackle the problem. The government has introduced some really interesting projects on energy saving in cities. The use of low-energy light bulbs to reduce the consumption of lighting energy, better insulation for homes and things like that. There's also a massive recycling scheme, which is saving a huge amount of our natural resources. What's needed now, though, is to expand work like this across the world.
And what are your plans for the future, after you've left college?
Actually, I'd like to go into politics. We've got somehow to persuade governments in developed countries to change their priorities. For example, even if just a small percentage of the money spent on the arms trade could go into tackling climate change, I'm sure we could make a difference.
And you think that as a politician you'd be able to do this?
I'd certainly like to try.
Before we finish, have you got any questions about the course here at the college?
I've noticed that statistics is included in the course. I'm a bit concerned about that.
I wouldn't worry about it. You'd be able to get by with a reasonable knowledge of maths.
That's very reassuring. I also wanted to ask about the field trip for second-year students.
OK. The second-year students go to Nepal in June, looking at the ecology of mountain environments.
Oh, and that sounds like a fantastic opportunity.
Recording 6A. Extract 1.
I took up running a couple of years ago. Until then I did a bit of sport at school, but I didn't do much outside school at all. In fact, I suppose I didn't have many interests, except playing computer games. Then I went to watch my uncle in a 5k fun run. It was to raise money for charity. I thought the whole event was brilliant, and every runner there seemed to be enjoying it. There was another fun run later in the year, and I signed up for a laugh. I didn't do any proper training for it, just a bit of jogging around the park after school. So I was really surprised when I managed to run all the way. Now I run nearly every day, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of it. My friends all think I'm crazy. None of them like the thought of running long distances. I think about all kinds of stuff when I'm running, and I know it's really good for my heart and lungs. Sure, some people get running injuries, but I've been lucky. I've had none so far.
Extract 2.
I'd never really thought about exercise and keeping fit until a couple of years ago. My boyfriend and I were in town late and we had to run to catch the last bus home, just a couple of 100 metres. By the time we got to the bus stop, both of us were completely exhausted. On the way home we started talking. Neither of us did any exercise, and I didn't do much with my free time, just reading magazines and eating biscuits. By the time we got home, we'd each decided to take up a different activity for 6 months and see who could lose the most weight. My boyfriend joined a gym and I started running in the local park. Just a few hundred metres at first and gradually building up. Now I run a few kilometres each day. Of course, that takes up quite a lot of time and my boyfriend moans about that sometimes. But after I've been sitting at my computer all day, I can't wait to go out for a run. We certainly both got a lot fitter and I've lost a lot of weight. Not all the effects are positive, of course. I've had a few problems with sore knees and sprained ankles. I suppose all exercise carries some risks, but there isn't much evidence that running causes major problems if you warm up carefully and have good footwear. It's one of the few sports where no special equipment's needed, just a pair of running shoes.
Extract 3.
I had 3 older brothers, and I think they could all have been Olympic athletes if they'd had the opportunity. So it was quite natural that I would go out running with them. I think I started at about the age of 10, and I've been running regularly all my life. Now that I'm getting older, I go out running every couple of days. But if the weather's bad, I might go all week without a run. I certainly go out a lot less during the winter. Well, who would want to go running on a horrible rainy day? Inevitably, you get a few injuries too. Everyone gets aching muscles after a long run, and I used to get back pain occasionally. But surprisingly, I seem to have fewer injuries now than when I was younger. Maybe it's because I run more slowly. Actually, I feel a lot healthier, and I even sleep a little better after I've been out running. But I think the best thing for me is the social contact. We've got a running club in our village. I moved here when I retired, and before I joined the club, I had very few friends who lived nearby. Now, many of my closest friends are the runners in the club. Next spring, we're all going to Madrid to run in a marathon for over 60s only. Of course, we know that not all of us will finish, but you can be sure that every one of us will have a really good time. My aim is to complete the course and do it in less than 6 hours. But I know it won't be easy.
Recording 6B. You'll hear a woman called Janet Naylor talking about her experience as a volunteer in Tanzania. For questions 1 to 8, complete the sentences.
Earlier this year, I fulfilled a lifelong ambition of mine by working for 3 months as a volunteer in an African country. I'm in my late 50s now, and I don't have the commitments that have previously held me back. I've worked in marketing for much of my life, and I wanted to use the skills I have to help out in a small way. I applied to do voluntary work a couple of years ago, but it wasn't until about a year later that a suitable scheme came up and I was asked to go. The reaction of my friends to the news was interesting. Many were impressed, I think, and a lot said that given the opportunity, they'd like to do something similar. Although I must say that not all of them were so keen when I told them later about how basic the conditions were. But a few clearly disapproved of what I was doing. They argued that I was patronising Africans by intervening and telling them how to run their lives. But I saw it rather differently. Ideally, development schemes should be set up by the communities themselves, but sometimes local people don't yet have the necessary skills to make them effective and need some kind of outside expert support. And that's where I came in. The scheme I worked on was based in a village of about 200 people in Tanzania. It involved building concrete tanks to capture water during the wet season, with the aim of reducing the problem of drought during the rest of the year. With better irrigation would come more reliable crops, so that eventually the villagers would become self-sufficient. There had been a severe drought in the area for the previous 3 or 4 years. The whole region was on the brink of starvation, and handouts from charities were the only thing that kept people alive. The scheme had been underway for less than a year when I arrived, and my brief was to suggest ways in which the villagers could market any agricultural production that was surplus to their own requirements, any food that they didn't need themselves. I've heard now that the village is making money from its crops, and it's built a primary school and a small health centre. It's very gratifying to know that the scheme has completely transformed its prospects, and the village is now well on its way to becoming a thriving community.
Recording 7.
In the studio today, we have the novelist David Bardreth, whose most recent book, A Woman Alone, was published last week. Welcome to the programme, David.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Now, David, you came relatively late to writing, didn't you?
Well, I suppose I'd always been a writer. Poems, short stories and so on. But only my close family had read anything I'd written until I had my first novel published in my early 40s.
And how did you feel about that?
Oh, it felt fantastic having my first book published.
But at that time, you were a primary school teacher in your native Scotland. At what stage did you leave teaching?
Until my third novel was published, I was happy to teach during the day and write in the evening and at weekends. But I found that there wasn't enough time to do both as well as I wanted to. So I left teaching and I started writing professionally. Some of my close friends thought I was mad to give up my job, and I was greatly relieved that my subsequent book sold quite well.
So no regrets about leaving teaching?
Oh, it was the most difficult decision imaginable. I'd worked at the same school for about 15 years, and I felt bad leaving the children, and also some very close colleagues and friends. But I still live near the school, and I go back on every possible occasion.
Tell us something about the process of your writing. How carefully do you outline the story at the very beginning?
Before I start writing, I always know how a book is going to end, although I rarely have a clear idea at the beginning of how the characters will develop. As I write, gradually they grow into real people in my own mind. But sometimes even I'm surprised at how they turn out.
And what about your daily work routine?
I suppose I'm fairly disciplined in my writing. I'm generally up at about 7 in the morning, and I usually start work by about 8 o'clock. I work upstairs. We've converted our attic into a study. In the early stages of a new book, I'll often go to the city library in the afternoon to do some research.
You don't use the internet?
As a rule, I prefer finding information from books, and I only turn to the internet as a last resort.
Let's go on now to your latest novel, A Woman Alone. I was surprised to find it set in Norway.
Yes, I finished my previous book last January. I'd been feeling really tired, and I was aware that I needed rest and a source of fresh ideas. I taught English in Sweden after I left university, and I still speak Swedish quite well, but I hadn't been to Norway before. There are a lot of historical links between Norway and the north of Scotland, so I decided to spend some weeks there. Some of the geographical settings used in A Woman Alone are based on places I visited while I was travelling around.
And A Woman Alone seems to be more personal than many of your other works.
I'd already decided that I wanted to write about a single-parent family. As you may know, my sister and I were brought up by my mother on her own. The mother in the story, Elsa, is very protective of her children, as was my own mother. But although they have certain common characteristics, Elsa is not really modelled on my mother. Elsa is quite a dominant figure and a woman susceptible to periods of depression, whereas my mother was a rather gentle woman and always even-tempered.
And when you're researching and writing books, do you have time to read other people's novels?
Oh, I do, yes. One novelist I greatly admire is William Boyd. He writes simply but with great control of language. I've just finished his excellent novel, Restless. It's a quite remarkable story.
I'll certainly add to my list of books to read. And what about your present writing project? What are you working on now?
Well, I don't know if I can tell you yet. I'm still sketching out the plot, so it's very much in the early stages.
I know there'll be a lot of people waiting eagerly to get hold of it. David Bardreth, thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure.
Recording 8.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Alice. Listen, we need to make a decision about our holiday. If we don't decide soon, it'll be too late to get anywhere to stay. It's got to be Corfu, hasn't it?
I'm not sure how we'd get there.
Well, my brother went there last year. He flew to Rome, then took a train to Brindisi, and then had to get a boat.
No, it's not as difficult as that. We could fly from London to Athens and then take a flight from there to Corfu. It takes about 6 hours. I've had a look on the internet and it looks like there's a flight that leaves London at about 10 in the morning. But we need to book soon. The longer we leave it, the more expensive it's going to be.
But obviously, it would be much easier getting to Athens. There's lots of flights, and we wouldn't have to change.
Then what about somewhere to stay? Aren't hotels supposed to be pretty expensive in Corfu?
Well, I've found 3 that seem possible. I've printed off the details here. They all look pretty good, and they're right next to the best beach on the island.
Which one's cheapest?
This one here, €60 a night for a double room.
Well, accommodation would be cheaper in Athens, I think. It says in my guidebook that there are reasonable hotel rooms for as little as €40 a night. There's one here recommended. It's a bit far from the city centre, but it's on the metro, so it's easy enough to get into the centre from there.
It wouldn't be as nice as being able to look out over a beach. What worries me is what we do in Athens for a couple of weeks.
Look, Athens is one of the oldest cities in the world. There's lots of museums, and then there's the Acropolis with the Parthenon.
I remember going to Rome with my parents once. We spent the whole time looking at museums and art galleries, and it was the most boring holiday I've ever had.
Yeah, I think it'd be more fun to go to Corfu. I much prefer lying on a beach to walking around art galleries all day, and it would be more peaceful than being in a city. I want to come home more relaxed and healthier, not unhealthier than when I went away.
Yes, I prefer to go to an island too, although I don't want to lie on the beach all day. Maybe we could hire a car and explore the island a bit.
Yeah, we want to see as much as possible, and a car would be the easiest way of getting around. It's probably not as unspoilt as some of the other Greek islands, but it's still supposed to be a really beautiful place, so we'll want to see as much as we can. What about the weather in August? I know we all want to see some sunshine, but isn't Athens supposed to be incredibly hot in August? I've heard that it gets so hot that a lot of people leave the city to find somewhere cooler.
No. My friend Mark used to work there as an English teacher, and he reckons the heat is nowhere near as bad as people say. Anyway, isn't Corfu likely to be as hot as Athens at that time of the year?
I think you get the breezes off the sea.
Recording 9.
First, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Lynn Jones, and I'll be taking you for the first 5 lectures in this course on first language learning. I'd like to begin today's session by highlighting some of the main areas that I'll be covering with you. From the moment they wake up, infants are keen to interact and communicate with others. This interaction may not, of course, be with people. Early morning sounds from a child's bedroom may be them babbling to themselves, or speech as a child speaks to their toys. I recently bought my 2-year-old daughter a cuddly elephant, and it has become the person she talks to each morning lying in bed. And as my 3-year-old dresses herself, she likes to talk to each item of clothing. Red jumper, your turn. So, the first lecture will be about what I call private conversations. Of course, a child's parents are usually their most important focus of interaction, and in the second session, we'll be exploring the part that parents play in very early communication. The first stage of interactive play might be a child giving a toy to their mother or offering her some food. And even before they can use words, infants employ their faces, bodies, and sounds to communicate what they want. A hand outstretched to a toy could mean, "Give it to me," or a broken toy handed to a parent with an "ah" might mean, "Mend this for me." Parents encourage this kind of interaction by, for example, hiding an object behind them and asking, "Where's it gone?" At first, infants point, and then later verbalize a response. The importance of infants listening to adults speaking for the development of their own language cannot be overestimated. Many parents play follow the instructions games with their children when they first become mobile, saying things like, "Go to the toy box and find the car for me," or "Fetch me your hat." Although, as the parents of older children will know, the novelty for children of following instructions soon wears off. Reading stories for young children is a similarly important part of this process of listening and understanding. But even when children are not being actively encouraged to listen, they will be seeking to make sense of the language they hear. When children appear to be busying themselves with their toys or applying themselves to painting a picture, they will be absorbing the speech they hear around them and often copying what they hear in their own speech. So the third area we'll be looking at is the relationship between listening and the development of speech. Interactions between infants will often copy parental speech and behavior. Two small children at a nursery school might hug each other when they meet each morning, because that's what parents do to the children when they are collected from school. Most parents at some time hear their child say something and ask themselves the question, did they copy that from us? Of course, it is very difficult to assess exactly the extent of parental influence. Take, for example, the area of conflict. It is not uncommon to see in a nursery school two small children playing with each other peacefully one moment, but they might be hitting each other the next. If their language is more developed, they might each blame the other for a broken toy or a spilt drink. While these would be uncharacteristic of normal adult interaction, perhaps the conflicts between parents witnessed by small children somehow are mimicked in these arguments. A fourth area, then, will be the extent to which patterns of communication are copied. A final subject I will examine during the course is that of problems in language acquisition. We might consider first language learning natural, a normal process that everyone goes through, and Dr. Jackman will be describing this process to you in detail in later talks. However, a significant number of children either acquire language more slowly than the usual rate or never reach an average level of language proficiency. This topic will obviously be of particular importance to those of you who are going on to work with children with learning difficulties or as speech therapists. So, first of all then, let's look at the private conversations that infants engage in.
Recording 10.
Hello. All you regular listeners to Traveller's World will know that our intrepid reporters are sent around the globe, coming back with stories of marvellous times spent in exotic locations. In today's programme, however, we begin with a trip that had a nightmare start. Just to reassure you that even professional travellers can get it wrong. So, Simon Richer, tell us your sorry tale.
Hello, Jackie. Yes, my assignment was to visit the beautiful island of Lombok in Indonesia. I was supposed to have been flying from London to Singapore, and then from Singapore to Mataram in Lombok. I arranged for a taxi to collect me from home in good time, but it eventually turned up an hour late.
So you were late to the airport?
Got there just as they were closing the check-in desk. I handed over my suitcase, but then, to my horror, I found I didn't have my passport. I'd been so anxious to get into the taxi that I'd forgotten to pick it up.
How very unprofessional of you.
I know. In 25 years of air travel, that's the first time it's ever happened to me. So, back home I went to get it, and then off to plead with the airline. Eventually, they found me an alternative flight a day later. It meant flying to Bali and then taking a ferry to Lombok. But I decided to go ahead. The journey went very smoothly until we got to Lombok. Apparently, there'd been a fire and we were made to wait outside the harbour for hours, and the sea was very rough.
And you were seasick?
Very. And of course, because I'd changed my flight, I also had to stay in a different hotel. I'd really been looking forward to staying at the Hotel Sinar in Mataram, but I had to make do with a less luxurious place. No pool and no TV in my room.
And what about Lombok itself?
Oh, it was beautiful. A number of people had encouraged me to go to the coral reefs off the northwest coast of the island. I managed to find a friendly taxi driver called Aaron to take me and wait for me there. Now, when I was younger, I used to hate swimming in the sea. But I went snorkeling for the first time just last year and loved it, so I couldn't wait to have another go. The coral was just a few metres off the beach, so it was quite safe.
Until what happened?
Well, I'd been swimming for a few minutes. The coral was fantastic, some of the best I've seen. And then all of a sudden there was this huge jellyfish in front of me, and I couldn't get out of the way. As it swam past, I felt it stinging me across the stomach. I started screaming. It was incredibly painful, and headed back to the beach. Fortunately, there was a small settlement nearby, and some of the villagers helped carry me back to my taxi. Aaron was fantastic. He took me to the local clinic, and the doctors were excellent. I really appreciated them looking after me so well. It was sore for a few days, though, and I was told to take things easy.
So how did you spend the rest of your time there?
Well, Aaron really took care of me. The next day we went on to drive towards Mount Rinjani, the highest mountain in Lombok. The mountain's thought by some to have been created by the god Batara. According to tradition, he created light and the earth and still lives in Rinjani. And as we stopped to admire the amazing sunset, it was almost possible to believe it. I really regret not having taken my camera with me.
No camera?
No. That was another of my disasters. I'd picked up my passport, but then I'd left my camera. I tried using the camera in my mobile phone, but the quality was pretty poor.
And what about the people in Lombok?
Aaron's family lived close to the mountain. I was really interested in seeing what it was like in a traditional Lombok family, and he invited me to stay with them. Very soon I came to realise that the Lombok people are very kind and hospitable. It wasn't long before I was beginning to feel quite at home there. Aaron's family are Sasak, who make up about 80% of the population. The Sasaks are thought to have originally come to Lombok from India or Burma.
So the trip actually ended quite positively?
Absolutely. I considered staying for a few more days, but I didn't have time. But I really hope to go back in the next few years. The island obviously wants to encourage tourism to boost the economy, but I'd love to think that it could avoid a huge expansion in visitors.
Thank you, Simon.
Recording 11.
The story of radio probably begins with Heinrich Hertz, who was the first to produce radio waves in a laboratory. He devised an experiment in which a spark jumped across a gap in a metal ring when a sparking coil was held a few meters away. The model that you can see in case 1 shows how this works. For most people, however, it is the Italian Guglielmo Marconi whose name is mainly associated with the development of radio. Before Marconi's breakthrough, it was possible only to send electrical messages, or telegraphs, along fixed wires. This obviously greatly restricted the places to which telegraphs could be sent. Marconi's goal was to find a system where telegraphic messages could be transmitted without the need for the connecting wires that were used in the electric telegraph. For some time, he was only able to transmit signals over a few hundred meters, and there were many people who doubted Marconi would ever succeed. The first public demonstration of the power of radio came in 1901, when Marconi announced that he had received a transmission from across the Atlantic. The old photograph that you can see ahead of you shows Marconi at Signal Hill in St. John's, Newfoundland, where this first transmission was received. Soon after, Marconi opened a wireless telegraph factory in England, which employed around 50 people. There are just a few of the wireless telegraphs the factory produced left in the world, an example of which you can see in Case 2. These early radio systems could only be used for Morse code, in which each letter of the alphabet is represented by a combination of dots and dashes. Radio waves could not carry speech until a method had been developed whereby the low-frequency waves produced in a microphone could be combined with high-frequency radio waves. The invention that made this possible was the vacuum tube or thermionic valve. You can see examples of these in Case 3. In several countries, radios became the main means of communication during the 1930s and 1940s. The next photograph shows friends gathered around the radio in the mid-1930s. Radio entertainers, many of whom became household names, were highly paid. In Britain, the popularity of radio increased until 1952, by which time 4 out of 5 households owned one. You can probably guess the reason why radio began to lose some of its popularity in the early 1950s: competition from television. Move now to room 36, where you can find information and displays about the early days of television.
Recording 12.
Photographs of food are all around us, in advertisements, magazines and cookbooks. Today's guest is Helena Palmer, who has made a highly successful career out of food photography. Welcome, Helena.
Thank you.
So, how did you become involved in food photography? Was your first interest the food or the photography?
Oh, definitely photography first. When I was quite young, 10 or 11, I started using an old camera belonging to my father. I became fascinated with taking shots of people, my friends and my family in particular.
And were you also interested in the way food was presented, in restaurants, for example?
My parents, not having much money, rarely took us to restaurants. But my mother was an excellent cook. I used to take shots of her in the kitchen, and also some of the special things that she'd prepare, birthday cakes and things like that.
And you left school quite young?
Yes, I wasn't very gifted academically, so at 16 I left school and went to help out at a local photographic studio. It was easy to find a photographer wanting to take on an assistant for no pay. For a couple of years I lived at home with my parents, who supported me financially, and I was very lucky that the photographer who took me on taught me a lot. She was really the first person to encourage me to take up food photography. She always let me help out with food shoots, wedding cakes, publicity photos for local restaurants and so on. Then, when I was 18, there was a major photography competition being held in London, and one of the categories was celebrations. So, I entered a portfolio of photographs, just for the experience, I thought. By that time, I was getting quite into it.
And you won.
That's right. At that time, I was the youngest person in the competition to win any of the major categories.
Now, it's sometimes said that photographing food is the most difficult job for a professional photographer. Is that really true?
It can certainly be very difficult to make it look appetizing. Food photography is all done in studios, and the biggest problem is the heat produced by the lights. It can take a very long time to get everything exactly right for a shot, and by that time a chef's carefully prepared salad might look limp, or a cream cake becomes a mound of wet sponge.
So, how do you get round that?
Well, firstly, the food in photographs used to illustrate cookbooks and magazine articles isn't always entirely authentic.
You mean it's made of plastic?
Well, some of it, perhaps, but not all of it. If great food could be copied in plastic, I'd be out of a job. We have a number of techniques to help us out. First, a lot of the items in the photograph can be set up early. Glasses, cutlery, flowers perhaps. And then we put in some material to substitute for the food. Something with the same size, shape and colour. Often we just make this quickly in the studio from cardboard or any other material available and paint it.
Personally, I prefer food not made of cardboard.
Don't we all? In the meantime, a food stylist prepares the food to be photographed.
A food stylist?
Oh, yes. Most professional food photographers employ a food stylist nowadays. As soon as I'm satisfied with the setting, lighting and so on, we take out the artificial food and put in the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the food starts to dry out very quickly, so I generally have with me a spray bottle containing glycerine mixed with water.
Oh.
Glycerine's a liquid, completely colourless, that's often used to sweeten food.
Uh-huh.
It's great for keeping food looking shiny and moist. Another difficulty is that food is sometimes meant to be hot and steaming. But of course, by the time we photograph it, it's completely cold. The only thing to do in that case is to create steam from elsewhere. We use cotton wool balls soaked in water and then put in a microwave. These steam nicely for a couple of minutes, and we position them so that it looks like it's the food steaming. Something else I wouldn't be without is a small blowtorch.
What do you use that for?
Hundreds of things. Quickly melting butter over vegetables, browning toast. A technique that might be used in photographing meat is to take a piece of, say, chicken, use the blowtorch for a while so that it's nicely golden brown, and then spray some glycerine on the outside to make it look moist. It looks great in the photo, but it might be raw on the inside.
Helena, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for coming into the studio.
My pleasure.
Recording 13.
Thanks to both of you for filling in the questionnaire about your diet and for agreeing to discuss the issues that it raised. First of all, Sarah, could you describe your eating habits on a typical day?
Well, on a typical working day, I usually start with a piece of toast and a glass of orange juice. For lunch, I generally have a sandwich and a packet of crisps as I'm sitting at my desk. When I get home late, I take a ready meal out of the freezer and put it in the microwave. Curries are really good, or something with noodles.
And what about you, Don?
I'm pretty much the same, actually. Although at the weekend, I like to make something myself, so as not to eat processed food all the time. I'll perhaps roast a chicken or do a salad.
At the weekend, I'm often with friends, and we'll usually go out to eat, seeing that none of us likes cooking.
OK. Can you tell me how your diet now is different from when you were younger, say, when you were a teenager?
Well, when I was younger, my mother used to keep an eye on what I ate. She tried very hard to encourage me to eat healthily. I think she made a particular effort, as I was often ill as a child. She also talked to me about the food she made so that I'd learn about diet and nutrition.
Right. Don?
Yes, I suppose because it's so easy to buy ready meals from the supermarket, it makes me quite lazy about cooking. And in that way, my diet isn't so good. But in some ways, it's better now, though. If I get hungry, I'll eat some fruit, whereas at school, I'd buy a bar of chocolate. I remember once I was eating some sweets in my bedroom when my mother walked in. I got a long lecture on the dangers of too much sugar.
But overall, you feel your diet is less healthy than it was, say, 10 years ago?
Yes, I think that's true, in that I ate more regularly then and had a more balanced diet.
OK. So, what are the main problems you see in your present diet, and what would you most like to change?
Well, for me, I think the biggest problem is breakfast. I don't eat much for breakfast because I'm always in a rush. I know that's not good for me, and I'd like to have something more substantial before I leave home in the morning. But I have to get out by 7:30 in order to catch my bus, so I really don't have time.
My biggest problem is that I tend to snack a lot. When I've had one of those ready meals, I feel hungry by the time I go to bed. So sometimes I get up in the night and have a snack, although I know it's bad for me. I must be eating too much because I've been getting a bit overweight recently. And as I put on weight, it gets more and more difficult to exercise. I was absolutely exhausted when I had to run for the bus yesterday.
Thanks. And what's preventing you from making the changes that you'd like to make in your diet?
I suppose time is the big problem. Although I'd like to eat more fresh food, I don't have time to prepare meals in the evenings, and I don't have the opportunity to go shopping while I'm working.
Well, my problem is that I'm not a very good cook. I actually read a lot about food and health and what I should be eating. But it's very hard to put a healthy diet into practice, despite the fact that I know all about the theory. And most recipes in magazines are no use to me because of the time they take. It would be really helpful to get... Recording 14A.
Plans to open a new zoo at Twyford have caused a major outcry among animal rights campaigners. With me in the studio to discuss the issue are Debbie Hall from the organisation Save the Animals, which campaigns against zoos, Mark Archer, who plans to open Twyford Zoo, and Wendy Kahn, who runs a safari park in the south of England, where visitors can drive their own cars through large enclosures where wild animals run free. Mark Archer, if I could come to you first, why is another zoo needed? Aren't there enough already?
Well, zoos have a number of very important roles. First of all, they're of enormous educational value. If we didn't have zoos, most people would never see wild animals in real life. The fact that there is no large zoo in this part of the country means that there's a real need for a zoo at Twyford. We want to make it as easy as possible for young people to come along so that they can learn about wild animals. Second, rare and endangered species can be preserved and hopefully bred in captivity, making sure that the species survives. If we'd introduced captive breeding earlier, we would have prevented the extinction of a number of animals. I'm thinking of animals like the Tasmanian tiger or the Chinese river dolphin. Unless we expand captive breeding, many more animals will die out.
Debbie Hall, your view on this?
Well, certainly we should have captive breeding programmes if it will help save species. But this doesn't have to be in a zoo, where animals are often kept in small enclosures and cages. If they were in the wild, they would have more space to roam free. And so many other aspects of zoos are unnatural for wild animals. It's not natural for different species to live separately from each other, or for them to be given food at regular times rather than hunt for it. And then there's the cruelty involved in capturing and transporting wild animals to zoos.
But what you've got to remember is that many animals in zoos nowadays were actually born in captivity.
That's no excuse. Even if wild animals are born in a zoo, it is still cruel to keep them in a small enclosure where they often become unhappy and prone to illness.
But if there's a health problem, vets deal with it quickly. In the wild, an animal that becomes ill is much more likely to die or be eaten.
That's true, of course. In the wild, animals do die through illness or are attacked by other animals. But this is perfectly normal, and how they lived for centuries before we started hunting them.
Wendy Kahn, can I bring you in here? You were disappointed that Twyford was to be a zoo and not a safari park.
Yes, I certainly was. First of all, I agree with Debbie that it's inhumane to keep animals in the conditions you find in most zoos. Safari parks offer all the educational experience of zoos, the close contact with animals, but they also allow animals to roam free in large enclosures. Safari parks are also very active in captive breeding programmes, of course. The decision to make Twyford a zoo rather than a safari park is a lost opportunity.
I'm all in favour of safari parks, provided that the animals are well looked after. Unfortunately, that hasn't always been the case in the past. But they can never replace zoos. They're places where large animals, mainly from Africa, giraffes, elephants, lions and so on, roam free. But you can't have small animals roaming around. If they're not eaten by the larger animals first, they'll be killed by visitors' cars.
If I could just get a word in here. Save the Animals believes that safari parks are not an acceptable substitute for zoos. Even though they say they're concerned about the welfare of animals, just like zoos, they are still businesses, mainly out to make a profit. Entertaining visitors is the priority, not the welfare of animals. Our view is that wild animals should be protected in their natural habitat. There are many successful reserves in Africa, for example, where wild animals roam peacefully.
But all that costs huge amounts of money that can only be provided by rich tourists who come to see the animals. Most families can't afford to make trips like that to see them. Safari parks allow city-dwelling children from all levels of society access.
But animal welfare is more important. In reserves, animals can be monitored and treated for illness, and they can be protected from poachers. And they have as much space as they need to live their lives freely. So long as developed countries put money into these reserves, species will be preserved.
I'm sorry, but that's unrealistic.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for tonight. Wendy Kahn, Debbie Hall, Mark Archer, thank you.
Recording 14B. You'll hear 5 short extracts in which people are talking about cooking. For task 1, choose from the list A to H the person who is speaking. For task 2, choose from the list A to H what each speaker is expressing. While you listen, you must complete both tasks. Speaker 1.
By the time I get home after a hard day, and with the prospect of an evening of preparation and marking ahead of me, the last thing I want to do is spend a lot of time in the kitchen. I live on my own, so dinner isn't a time to talk and relax unless I've got friends round. I just tend to grab a sandwich and eat it while I'm watching the news or working. If I want good food, there are some pretty good restaurants around here.
Speaker 2.
Even when I'm abroad, I'd rather go somewhere that serves the kind of food I'm used to, steak and chips and things like that. Sometimes this gets to be a bit of a problem if I'm transporting stuff to somewhere off the beaten track. If I don't know the place I'm going to, I'll generally take food from home to keep me going for a few days and eat in the cab rather than eat out.
Speaker 3.
When I was training, I lived at home and my mum did all the cooking unless she was away from home. She really enjoys it, so she didn't mind. Now I realise I should have paid more attention to what she was doing, but she's offered to lend me some recipe books and give me some tips, so that will really help. But just now I'm rushed off my feet. I'm working in the accident and emergency department, and we have to do long hours and night shifts every other week. If I wasn't so busy, I'd certainly like to cook more. Hopefully things will be less frantic when I get moved to the children's ward at the end of the year.
Speaker 4.
I went off to France for a year after school and really got hooked on good food and cooking during that time. Unless I've got lectures first thing, I generally go down to the market to get the best quality stuff. None of us has got a lot of money to spare, but you can get real bargains at some of the stalls. Then in the evening I cook for my flatmates. They're pretty appreciative, and if they enjoy what I've cooked, well, that's what it's all about.
Speaker 5.
I'm at home most of the time, and I don't have a set pattern of work. If the writing's going well, I might work through from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon without a break, unless the sun's shining, and then I might go out for a walk. This means that I tend not to eat regularly, or I forget to buy anything in the shops. I'll often go out and get a takeaway or something late in the day. Not very nutritious, I realise, but it's difficult if you've got deadlines to meet.
Recording 15.
Have you seen Sam's article for this week?
No, not yet. He'd got as far as Naples last week, hadn't he? Oh, go on. Read it out.
Right. He's called it Rest and Rats, from Naples to Amalfi. When I last wrote, I was just north of Naples. I was tired, had big blisters on my feet, and having fallen over a number of times, I was feeling thoroughly miserable. Now, a week later, I'm sitting in a restaurant, looking out over the Mediterranean, watching the sun go down. And life has improved greatly.
Oh, that's a bit better. To hear him grumbling last week, you'd think he was about to get on the next flight home.
He sounds in good form now. Listen to this. I had no idea where I was heading when I walked into Naples. Exhausted by a difficult few days, I was only interested in finding a bed for the night. Not wanting to carry my backpack any further than I needed to, I went to the first hotel I came across. But I struck lucky. I'd found a small, friendly hotel. In fact, the welcome I got at the hotel made me decide to stay for a couple of days. While in Naples, I did what all visitors do. I took a tour to Vesuvius and Pompeii. Fascinating places, and it was so good to sit on a coach and give my feet a rest. You've been there, haven't you?
Yes, I went a couple of years ago. Pompeii is amazing. I don't imagine he rested his feet that much, though. It's such a big place to walk around. What else does he say?
Let's see. But after a couple of days of rest and relaxation, I was ready to get back on the trail. Before leaving Naples, I bought yet more walking socks and a new pair of boots. These are not just any old boots, though. Made from the softest leather imaginable, they are as comfortable as a pair of slippers. He must be really pleased. He was getting so many blisters with the old pair. Having left the sprawl of the city behind me, I walked up into the hills to avoid the long trek around the coast. There's spectacular scenery up there and beautiful views to the sea. On the downside, though, the hills are covered in thorny bushes and the whole area is very rocky. At times, it was difficult to follow the paths as they're not well marked, and I often had to retrace my steps. I also had a few unpleasant encounters with the local wildlife. Walking into one village, I was met by a pack of unfriendly dogs. Snarling aggressively, the dogs were pretty terrifying at first, but I found that if I ignored them, they soon lost interest in me. I met some smaller wildlife too. The first night on the hills, I pitched my tent and was ready to sleep. But opening up my sleeping bag, I discovered a scorpion.
Oh, you're kidding. Aren't they dangerous?
Well, Sam obviously wasn't sure. I'm no expert on scorpions, and I didn't know if this one was poisonous. I shook it out of my sleeping bag well away from the tent and made sure it was heading off in the opposite direction before I settled down for the night. But then, around 2 a.m, having been woken up by a scratching sound, I found a large rat trying to get into my backpack. Fortunately, it ran off when I threw my boots at it. What with sleeping so badly and a long and difficult walk along some treacherous paths down from the hills, it was quite a relief to get to Amalfi this afternoon. I'm now ready for dinner. I've been recommended the local speciality of lasagna with ricotta cheese and a few more miles of walking tomorrow towards Ravello. This time, though, it will be along the coast and, I hope, scorpion and rat-free. Another report next week.
Well, it sounds like he's enjoying Amalfi anyway. He hasn't got much further to go, has he?
No, probably another 2 or 3 weeks and he'll be back with us.
Recording 16.
First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you this evening. I'm sure you all know the area a couple of miles out of the village known as the Norton Marsh. You've probably also heard that the marsh has been given to the NWT to look after. Unfortunately, the marsh has been neglected for many years. It's overgrown, paths have disappeared, and the stream running through the area is blocked by rubbish. Our plan is to return the marsh to its natural state as far as possible. We'd like to follow the example of what they've done at Broadstone Park, which many of you will have been to. A few years ago, it was a wilderness. Now it's a thriving nature reserve full of animal, bird and plant life, with a popular nature trail for visitors. Broadstone Park is part of the Montague family estate, and as such was largely funded by private means. As a charitable trust, we have to rely on contributions from the public. and we have to face up to the fact that we don't have the resources at the moment to achieve our aims. Don't worry, I'm not asking you for your money this evening, but I am asking for your help. We're looking for volunteers to help us work on the marsh over the next few years. For example, we need people to clear the vegetation, maintain paths, clear the stream and build fences. Clearing the vegetation is something that is urgently needed. But why should you volunteer? Well, the reason for most people is that they want exercise and fresh air. And it's also good to know they're helping the environment. There's a great social side to the NWT too. I can guarantee that you'll make a lot of new friends. And we organise barbecues and other social events. If you don't fancy the physical work that's involved at the marsh, you can still help. We also need people to address envelopes, deliver promotional material, and publicise the NWT on the net. Whether you help with the outdoor or indoor work depends on you. It's entirely up to you to decide how much time you can give to work at the NWT. We will be very grateful for whatever time people can spare. 9 o'clock is when we usually meet on Saturday and Sunday mornings. Just come along to the marsh and we'll show you what to do. You don't have to make a decision tonight. You can get in touch with me at any time. If you've got any questions about what I've said so far, I'd be very happy to answer them.
What you've told us is very interesting and I'd like to be involved, but I'm not a member of the NWT and I've heard it's quite expensive to join.
The fact that you're not a member of the Trust makes no difference. We're just looking for people with enthusiasm, commitment and some spare time.
Can I ask why the marsh was given to the NWT?
Well, Mr. Reynolds, the man who gave us the land, has been a supporter of the NWT for many years and wanted us to take over the area a long time ago. Unfortunately, he'd been in a dispute over property with his brother and there was some debate as to whether he could legally give us the land. That dispute has now been resolved, so he got his wish and the land is now ours.
I'd like to be involved, but I don't know whether or not I'd be able to come on a regular basis. Would that be a problem?
Not at all. Come when you can. You'll be made very welcome.
I don't have a car. Does the NWT organise lifts to the marsh, as I don't know if I can get there by public transport?
There is a bus, the number 45, that goes from town past the marsh, although I can't remember whether it runs on Sundays.
No, the Sunday service was cancelled a while ago.
Anyway, we organise lifts for people who don't have their own cars, and each weekend one person is responsible. You can phone whoever is in charge of arranging lifts on the weekend you want to come, and we'll make sure someone will collect you from your home. Oh, and take you back, of course.
Recording 17.
I learned to drive with a driving instructor, and I think there are lots of advantages to this. Firstly, cars like the one I learnt in have dual controls, so the instructor can take over accelerating, braking and stuff. Also, my instructor never got annoyed, however badly I was driving. Even if I did something incredibly stupid, like stalling in the middle of a busy road, he'd stay completely cool. He was really encouraging as well as being incredibly patient. We used to stop driving at some point during the lesson, and he would ask me how I felt I'd improved. So he'd always be focusing on what I was doing right. Another thing is that being so experienced, he'd got lots of really useful tips to pass on. Like, for example, reversing around corners. At first, I couldn't get the hang of this at all. However I had the mirror positioned, I just couldn't judge where the back of the car was. But he told me exactly what to do, how to sit, what I should be able to see out of the mirror and windows and so on. After that, it was dead easy. There were disadvantages, of course. Occasionally, my usual driving instructor was ill, so the driving school sent along a replacement. That was a bit disappointing, because he was great, and I didn't want to be taught by anyone else. Even so, I always found the replacements very patient and helpful. Another advantage is that experienced instructors know when you're good enough to pass. which I think is kind of difficult for non-professionals to judge. I just carried on having lessons until my instructor said I was ready to take the driving test. And he was right. I passed first time. Although it's expensive having driving lessons, I'd really recommend it.
My mum taught me to drive because I couldn't afford to pay for driving lessons. I think there's a lot of other good things about having your parents teach you besides saving money. You've got to book driving lessons in advance, but you can go out with your parents whenever it suits you. And you can spend a lot more time practicing as well. For example, my mum used to come and collect me from college in the car, and I'd drive home. What's more, she'd let me drive when we went shopping. My mum was a great teacher. Even though she doesn't have a professional qualification or anything, she's got lots of experience to pass on. I was lucky though, because she knew a deserted airfield near to where we live, and for the first few lessons, Mum took me there to practice. She wouldn't let me drive on busy roads before I could control the car reasonably well, and as long as I didn't do anything stupid, she stayed pretty calm. The only time I remember her getting stressed was when I was overtaking. I used to find it really hard. It was very different with my dad though. He took me out once when Mum was away. We'd hardly driven out of our road before we were shouting at each other. Then he made me practice hill starts for an hour. That's something I still have problems with, and we just snapped at each other all the time. Of course, one disadvantage of learning with your parents is that you have to pay a lot to insure the car. But apart from that, I think it's much better.
Recording 18.
A government report published today has shown a dramatic fall in recorded crime over the last 10 years. With me to discuss the report is the Home Affairs Minister, Kate Pullman. Minister, you must be very pleased with the findings.
Yes, indeed. I was delighted when I was given the figures. When we got elected 10 years ago, one of our priorities was a reduction in the disturbingly high crime figures. Obviously, the policies that we've put into place have had a significant impact so that during our period in office, there's been a 40% fall in the risk of being a victim of crime.
So, can you pinpoint what measures have had the most significant effect?
Well, I think I'd highlight 3 things. First, attitudes to committing crime have changed significantly since Peter Miles was appointed head of the police service. He has been successful in getting more police officers on the streets, and this has meant that a much higher proportion of offenders have been arrested during the last 10 years than ever before. Second, a huge amount has been invested in surveillance, particularly closed-circuit television. CCTV has been introduced into most city centres, and it's used widely now in helping to prevent car crime in particular. And third, I'd pick out our Make Amends scheme. Most people found guilty of vandalism are now made to repair the damage they've caused, and this has discouraged young people in particular from causing damage to property. The effect of this is becoming obvious. People are seeing less graffiti in city centres, for example. It's been so successful that a number of other countries are considering adopting a similar policy.
But it's not all good news, is it? While overall crime levels have fallen, some categories of crime have risen quite sharply, haven't they? Street crime is up over 25%.
It's true that there has been a surge in street crime. The reason for this can be found in the huge increase in the number of mobile phones. These have become a particular target for street robbers, but this figure is expected to fall rapidly as new technology starts being introduced to trace stolen mobiles. If they can be traced, they'll be a much less attractive target.
And drug-related crime is on the increase?
Well, it's certainly true that more people were caught selling drugs. It's not clear, though, whether there are more people out there selling drugs or whether there has been better policing and so more arrests.
There have been some questions raised about the accuracy of the figures in the report.
Well, Well, it may be that some minor mistakes were made in collecting the figures, but I don't think anyone would deny the general trends that are reported.
Finally, can I turn to the issue of the public perception of crime, which the report also investigates? It must concern you that despite the number of crimes falling in recent years, a majority of people believe that the crime rate has actually gone up. Everyone you speak to seems to have been a victim or know a victim of crime. If I can give a personal example, my house was broken into only last week and I had my TV and stereo taken. Virtually every person in my road has had a burglar alarm fitted recently.
I'm very sorry to hear that. Yes, there is a problem of public perception, but we're taking steps to improve this. For example, our latest poster campaign is intended to reassure people that violent crime is falling nationally. But it'll take a long time for perceptions to change, I think.
You don't believe then, as many people do, that crime is actually on the increase, but that fewer crimes are reported to the police?
I do accept that some of the fall might have been caused by lower rates of reporting, but I'm sure this has had a very small impact on the figures.
Kate Pullman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Recording 19A.
Oh, there you are, Kath. I've been looking for you. So, how did the meeting go?
Well, it was really interesting. There were a couple of representatives from the airport, and one of those, Mr. Kelly, spoke first. Then there was a short presentation by Sue Ray.
Who's Sue Ray?
The head of the No to Airport Expansion Group.
Oh.
After that, there were questions from the audience. Some of the people there got pretty angry.
I'm not surprised. Everyone I've spoken to thinks it's awful.
Yeah, well, I thought so too, before the meeting. But I'm not so sure now. I agree with the anti-expansion group that the plans will change the area, but maybe change isn't such a bad thing.
So the airport authorities have convinced you then?
Not entirely. They told us that the expansion would create around 2,000 jobs directly, people employed at the airport. They also said that it might increase tourism in the region. I wasn't so sure about this. I asked how it would boost tourism, and they admitted that they're not sure exactly how many more people it will attract, although they said it would certainly make it easier for people to get here. Actually, Sue reckoned the expansion would damage tourism because people won't want to go on holiday anywhere near an airport. They said that a growing number of people in the local area supported the expansion, particularly local business.
But what about the noise?
Mr. Kelly said the airport had carried out trial flights last month and no complaints had been received from people in the village. He convinced me that noise wouldn't be a problem for us.
And what were the airport people like?
Well, I expected them to be confrontational, but in fact they seemed quite understanding of the complaints. They promised to keep us informed about future developments. They say they'll be putting copies of the plans in the village hall. They encouraged us to go there and look at the plans in detail. They also announced that there would be a public inquiry before any final decision is taken.
I'm worried about the nuclear power station on the coast. Won't planes fly directly over it? And if ever a plane crashed into it, it would be a disaster.
They said that the flight paths they're proposing would keep planes away from the power station. Mind you, when Sue gave her presentation, she warned us that the airport authorities were not telling the truth. She obviously doesn't trust them, and demanded that we be shown the details of the flight paths. She wanted to know why we should believe them when they had denied for years that they wanted to expand. They avoided replying to that.
And what does the No to Airport Expansion Group want to happen next?
Well, we had a talk about that after the meeting. Someone asked Sue what we should do to protest about the proposal, and she advised us to write to our local politicians with our objections. And she also suggested inviting the Minister for Transport to hear our complaints. I've volunteered to write to her, and I'm going to go and have a look at the plans. Oh, do you want to come with me?
Yes, it'd be interesting to see what...
Recording 19B. You will hear two professional photographers, Alan and Maggie, talking about various aspects of their work. Decide whether the opinions are expressed by only one of the speakers or whether the speakers agree. Write A for Alan, M for Maggie, or B for both where they agree.
So, how did you get into landscape photography?
It started at school, really. There was an exhibition of landscape photography on in town, and my art teacher suggested that I go along. I was just bowled over by it and decided then and there that's what I wanted to do.
In my line of work, portrait photography, I rarely venture far from the studio. I like the degree of control you have there. I mean, outside you're dependent on the weather and being able to get access to just the right place to shoot from.
But that's part of the attraction of it for me. I love searching for the best vantage point, the quietness of waiting for the perfect moment for the shot, which may never come, and seeing the way a scene changes over time.
So you've never been tempted by studio work?
Well, early on I didn't have access to a studio, and later, when I was commissioned to do portraits, I found it quite restricting. It took me hours to set up the lighting and the position of the subject. I felt that creativity was lost, and this was reflected in my photographs.
That's certainly a risk. The temptation is to set things up so meticulously that by the time of the shoot, the subject has lost interest and can't help looking rather false, as if they'd rather be somewhere else.
And there's so much more involved in photography than just the techniques of using the camera and lighting.
Yes, it's not just a question of imagining what you want a portrait to look like. You've also got to be able to convey this to the subject, how you want them to sit, what kind of emotion you want expressed. These aren't the kinds of things you can demonstrate, but you've got to get that message across.
It's similar in landscape photography to some extent. Most of the work is for clients, tourist authorities and the like. You've got to listen to your clients and match their needs with your own preferences and negotiate an agreement on what the end product should look like. If clients want something that I know isn't going to work, I encourage them to look at the location in a different way.
Yes, negotiating with clients is something that all photography courses include these days.
Of course. We're both of a generation where it was rare to have formal training. Personally, I learnt from looking at the photographs of other professionals, making my own judgments about their quality.
I suppose that's where I wanted a teacher of some kind. I remember the hours I would spend poring over an image, trying to discover how they got some lighting effect.
It's true, it can take a huge amount of time, but you end up with skills that you'd never be able to learn from someone else. You've got to work these things out by yourself, without other people influencing you. Cartier-Bresson claimed that photography is a way of life, and he was right.
But I think the way you develop is through comments from people on your own work. Negative feedback can be quite hard to take, but it's a great help in shaping what I do.
Yes, it's an important influence on any artist's work. I quite like getting negative feedback, because it can point the direction I should be taking in a way that praise never can. In some ways, it's great when people consider that an exhibition of mine is a success, but what do I learn from that?
And, of course, our lives have been changed radically by the advent of digital photography. A colleague of mine persuaded me to switch to a digital camera shortly after they first appeared in the 1990s, and I've never looked back. Being able to see an image that you've captured pretty well instantaneously is amazing. And the biggest impact of all is on what happens after the image is captured. I mean, being able to adjust images on the computer.
But we get into difficulties here with the purpose of photography. For me, a drawing or painting can show something that never actually existed, something that can come entirely from the artist's imagination. A photograph, though, should show something that was in front of the camera when the photograph was taken. Digital technology allows you to interfere with a photograph, to show as real what the photographer prefers.
But don't you think that in some cases...
Recording 20A.
Are you still using the computer?
I won't be long. I was just looking at some of these adventure holidays in Australia. You've been to Australia, haven't you? Who did you go with?
A company called Transworld Adventures.
Oh, that's who I was thinking of going with. They do diving holidays in quite a few places. Perth, Brisbane, Sydney.
I went for the one based in Brisbane. It was a fantastic experience.
The website's a bit short on detail, though. What happened when you got there? Who met you at the airport?
One of the local organisers did, and then he drove me to a diving school just outside the city, where I met the others in the group. We had a week there learning to dive, and then we went to the Gold Coast, where we had a week of sailing.
Do they provide all the equipment? It doesn't say much about that on the website.
They should do. They certainly did for us. All the air tanks, weights and things that you need, although it's useful to have your own face mask and snorkel.
I'm a bit concerned about the diving. I'm not really a very good swimmer.
No, neither am I. But you don't have to be. That's the great thing about diving. You don't actually have to be a strong swimmer. What else were you thinking of doing?
Well, sailing would be great, but I've never sailed a boat before.
That doesn't matter. Nor had I, but it's really not that difficult, and the instructors are brilliant. And anyway, it doesn't matter if you fall in. The water's warm, and they give you life jackets to wear.
You think I'd enjoy it then?
Oh, I'm sure you would.
So, have you got any good tips?
Well, make sure you take a sun hat. It's easy to get burned. And take a couple of pairs of old trainers, preferably plastic ones because they get really wet on the boats. I took leather trainers that fell apart, and I had to buy new ones while I was out there. I suppose the other thing is that I didn't realise what hard work sailing is. By the end of the holiday, I was exhausted but very fit.
Yes, I need to get into better shape. I was also thinking about spending an extra week in Tasmania going river rafting. That's probably hard work too.
Sounds great, but I don't think Transworld Adventures do that, do they?
Yeah, it mentions it here on the website.
Let's see. Oh, so it does. That's new.
It looks amazing. You travel down the Franklin River in a rubber dinghy and then camp by the river at night.
Wow. Well, if you're going camping, don't forget to take a really good insect repellent. You'll certainly need some. Tea tree oil works very well.
What about other camping equipment? A tent and cooking things. Do you think I'll need to take those?
I don't imagine so. Usually they provide that sort of stuff. But why not contact them and ask them for more information?
Yeah, maybe I'll email them now.
Recording 20B. You will hear part of a radio interview in which David Evans, a chef in a British school, is talking about his work. Choose the answer, A, B, C or D, which fits best according to what you hear.
Today I'm talking to David Evans, who's a school chef at Academy School in Wales. Now, David, this is a new school, isn't it? And it takes a rather unusual approach to school meals.
That's right. When the school opened about this time last year, the new principal proposed that school dinners should be compulsory. Some people thought she'd be crazy to go ahead with the plan, but she was determined to. Obviously, this was quite a risky experiment. Students aren't allowed to bring in sandwiches or fizzy drinks, and each day there are only 2 options available, 1 vegetarian. We try to introduce a wide range of styles of cooking. Naturally, at first, students were a little dubious about the food. Most had only eaten what you might call traditional British food, so I think it was quite adventurous for them to try what they saw as unusual, the kinds of foods they normally wouldn't have the opportunity to eat at home or wouldn't want to.
And rather than having a typical school canteen with individual students lining up to collect food from the kitchen, you have a different arrangement.
Yes, we have our restaurant system. We get everybody seated at about 12:30 on tables of 6, and then 1 student from each table collects the food from the kitchen and serves it to the others. It's slow, but we deliberately encourage students to sit and talk around the table, including about the food they're eating. There's still some resistance to this, particularly as a lot of our students come from homes where fast food and ready meals are what's normally eaten, and family members eat at different times. They don't have the habits of conversation over a meal or discussions of food. But we see this as part of our mission, to give them basic social skills so they can operate in an adult world.
And what about staff here? What's their part in this?
Staff are expected to eat in the restaurant and sit with students, but they're not there to control things. They're there to talk to students about the food they're eating. And in this way, they learn about nutrition and how important it is to get the right amounts, and that having too much carbohydrate or fat isn't a good thing. Of course, it's not all food talk. An unexpected benefit is that the teachers learn more about students outside the classroom. At first, there were grumbles from teachers about being forced to eat with students rather than sitting with other members of staff, but now I think they prefer to.
And you always try to cook with fresh ingredients.
Yes, that's right, although we offer international dishes, both for nutritional reasons and because of environmental concerns. Pretty much all of the produce we use is locally sourced. We've also got a small herb garden behind the science block. Students can help with this if they're willing to, so as well as having fresh food, we're reducing the environmental problems associated with transporting food over long distances. We put up a map in the restaurant to show where food has come from. It's not always possible to get local produce, of course, but we do what we can.
Now, what about you personally, David? How did you come to take on the post of school chef here?
Well, I've had a varied career. I've been a waiter and a chef in a London restaurant. I've run 2 small companies, and I went on to train as a teacher. I taught domestic science in a secondary school for 10 years before taking on this job. I found that probably the most important part of the job is to listen to what the students say about the food. I spend a lot of time in the restaurant. I go and talk to the students. They'll always give me an honest opinion on whether or not they've enjoyed something. The time I spent in management has helped me most with this. You need to listen to what people are saying to get the best out of them and make the right decisions.
And do you think the approach to food you've taken here could be adopted in any school?
No, I don't think all schools would be able to. We're lucky in that we're a new school and we set it up with the ethos that learning about healthy eating is an important life skill, and students and their parents accept that, although sometimes rather unwillingly. It could be difficult to introduce this into an established school where, for example, chips and burgers are a regular feature of school dinners. Introducing a radical change when students are used to doing things in a certain way can be difficult, but any school could take some steps to make students aware of the importance of healthy eating. I'd certainly advise them to. Over time, I think we'll see most schools moving in this direction.
Recording 21.
The final presentation to be made tonight is an award for lifetime service to music education. And I'm delighted to say that this goes to Maria Adams. Before I ask Maria to come up and accept the award, I'd just like to say a few words about her. All of you will know of her achievements, first as a highly successful violinist, and then as conductor of the York City Orchestra. But fewer of you will know about her contribution to music education in this country and beyond. It was in the mid-1990s that we first met. She had been conductor of the YCO for about a year, and I was head of education on York City Council. For some time, Maria had been writing to me saying that the council should do more to help children's musical development in the city, particularly for those who came from poorer backgrounds. What she was suggesting was that members of the YCO would volunteer their services, either individually or in groups, to go into schools and play for children and run music workshops. In exchange, she wanted the City Council to lend instruments to children and provide free music lessons for children whose parents weren't able to afford them. This was at a time when the government had cut funding for music lessons. Eventually, I invited her to talk to the committee, so along she came to present a proposal. What she did first was convince us of the value of a musical education. Making music, she sees as a fundamental part of a child's development, as essential as an ability to read or write. What impressed us most was the way she calmly and clearly argued her case. By the end of the meeting, all of us had been won over by Maria's arguments, and the Music in Schools project was born. Somehow, we found the money to support it. Rarely have I met anyone with such passion for their beliefs. And thanks to Maria's enthusiasm, the project has been a tremendous success. Not only has she persuaded YCO members to give up their time willingly, but she has also encouraged visiting musicians to give free concerts in schools when they come to play in the city. Well, encourage perhaps isn't the right word. She's a very persuasive person. A number of times, the council has tried to make changes to the Music in Schools project in order to save money. When this has happened, Maria has demonstrated that she is a determined and persuasive character. 5 years ago, for example, there were plans to start charging all children for music lessons. But this she resisted. Only after Maria threatened to withdraw her support from the project did the council back down. Maria's dream was always to extend her work beyond this city, and with typical energy, she set about persuading the government to adopt the project throughout the country. What's happened as a consequence is that music has become established as an important part of the national curriculum. I think it's fair to say that had Maria not been around, music education in most schools in this country would have practically disappeared. Instead, so successful has it been that those involved in music education around the world have visited the city to see the project in action. And then came an invitation to be a special advisor to the government on music education. In this role, she has worked closely with the Minister for the Arts. Were he here tonight, I know that he would want to express his thanks personally to Maria. And as a further acknowledgement of her enormous service to music education, we'd like to present her with this Lifetime Achievement Award. Maria Adams, if you'd like to come up onto the stage.
Recording 22.
People living close to Lake Taal on the island of Luzon in the Philippines continue to be evacuated from the area as the Taal volcano threatens to erupt. Over to our reporter, Katie Hill.
Lake Taal lies in the huge crater of the Taal volcano. In the middle of the lake is a smaller volcano, which has been showing signs of increased activity over the last few weeks. Taal is one of the most active volcanoes in the world. In 1911, an eruption claimed over 1,000 lives, and in 1965, villages on the lakeshore were devastated by falling rocks and huge waves on the lake. Although scientists predicted the 1965 eruption, the authorities failed to warn villagers, and the breakdown in communication cost at least 100 lives. After the disaster of 1965, the government introduced the Taal Emergency Strategy. This involved monitoring the volcano for early signs of an eruption and the drawing up of an evacuation plan. Since that time, however, there has been an increase in the number of people living close to the lake, and the government has also encouraged the industrial development of the area. The building of 2 power stations just a few kilometers away was strongly criticized by environmentalists. In the event of an eruption, these would have to be shut down, possibly for a long period if damage occurs. The closure of the power stations would leave thousands of homes and businesses without electricity. Last month, scientists noticed a sudden rise in the temperature of the lake. There was also a dramatic rise in the level of radon gas in the soil. Their concerns increased with the discovery of thousands of dead fish, apparently killed by acidic volcanic gases rising from the bed of the lake. As a result, they gave a warning that Tal could erupt again at any moment. The authorities took immediate action. The president put government authorities on a state of high alert, saying that the danger of the situation made it necessary to bring in the army to oversee operations. The decision was made to evacuate an area of 5 kilometers around the entire lake, and 2 days ago, the evacuation of around 30,000 people began. The provision of temporary shelter in a safe location for those displaced is the Army's top priority, and it is now estimated that about 25,000 evacuees have arrived at the makeshift camps. Conditions in the camps are reasonably comfortable, and there are adequate supplies of food and water. But no one knows here how long they will be away from their homes, or indeed, if Tal erupts again, whether they will have homes to go back to. All they can do is watch and wait for nature to take its course. Katie Hill in the Philippines.
The government has announced that Barack Obama...
Recording 23.
So, what do you think? It's going to be hard to choose between them, isn't it?
Yeah, there's so many things to think about. But overall, I prefer the out-of-town apartment, the one in Canley.
Well, look, don't rush into a decision. It might help just to run through the pros and cons of each of them again.
OK, well, one obvious factor is price.
Yes.
The town apartment's about a third more expensive than the one in Canley.
True, although maybe you could get them to lower the price a bit. It's been on the market for a long time, so they're probably keen to sell it.
Yes, and it's obvious why they've been having problems selling it. It hasn't been decorated for years. I couldn't believe it when the agent said the decoration was in good condition. It clearly wasn't. It really shocked me to see how bad it was.
I'm sure you could get it decorated quite cheaply.
And what about location? One of the things that worries me about the Canley apartment is that it's about 15 kilometres from there into the centre. Living in town would make it so much easier to get to work.
It's certainly an advantage being able to walk to work rather than having a long commute. It would save you a lot of money.
Yes, but lots of people work in town and live in Canley, so there's bound to be a regular bus service from there. Didn't the agent say there's a bus stop just outside the apartment block?
Well, you'd need to look at the bus timetable to check how long it takes to get into town. Personally, I wouldn't like it if I had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to work for 9.
Another thing is that if I ever bought a car, there's the problem of parking at the town apartment. There's no special parking area for the apartments, is there? On the other hand, there's a car park behind the Canley apartment block.
But you're not likely to be able to afford a car for ages. It struck me that the Canley apartment might be quite noisy with that busy road nearby.
But it's in such a great location. There's a lot of open space at the back of the block. It'll be great in summer. And there's that lovely little river that runs nearby.
Yes, but I wonder whether it floods in heavy rain. I've heard there have been problems in the past.
It's a pity that the Canley apartment is so small. There wasn't much space in the bathroom, was there? Nowhere to store towels and things. And did you notice that in one of the bedrooms there was just a bed, a small wardrobe and some bookshelves? You couldn't even fit a chest of drawers in there.
The kitchen was quite small too.
I must admit the town apartment is a bit bigger, but the rooms in it are quite dark, and that made it feel cramped. I really like the light in the Canley apartment.
Another thing to consider is whether the apartment is going to be a good investment.
Yes, they say that the cost of property in the town centre is going to go up with more people wanting to move in. Apparently, there are plans to build new apartments not far from the one we looked at.
Maybe. Although the agent's advertisement for the Canley apartment says there is expected to be a lot of interest in the property.
Oh, I'm sure it's just a way of encouraging people to buy quickly. But take your time to think about it. There's no hurry to decide.
You really want me to take the town apartment, don't you?
Well, it's obviously your decision, but there are so many advantages of living in town.
Yes, and it would be so much easier for us to come and visit you there.
Recording 24A.
Dan Seville.
Oh, hi, Dan. It's Jess. Look, I'm really sorry, but I've messed up our plans for tomorrow.
Oh no, what's happened?
Something's come up at work. Well, to be honest, it's a really important meeting. I'm so silly. I arranged it weeks ago and I forgot to put it in my diary. It means I've got to spend a couple of days in Marseille, and I'll be heading off there early tomorrow morning.
Right.
So I won't be able to pick you up at the airport after all. I tried to reschedule the meeting for next week, but it's just impossible. I'm really, really sorry about this.
No, don't worry. I'm sure I'll be able to get to your place somehow.
Well, it means that you'll have to get to Perpignan from Montpellier Airport on your own, and I'm afraid it's a bit complicated. You've got to get to Montpellier railway station and then catch a train to Perpignan. If you've got a pen handy, you might want to take down some of the information I'm going to give to you.
OK, just a second. Right, go ahead.
OK, now, I know that you get to Montpellier Airport at 8 in the evening.
8:10, that's right.
I've found out the train times from the SNCF website, and it appears that the last one from Montpellier to Perpignan is at 10 minutes to 10. You really need to catch that train, or an earlier one. So the first step is to get from the airport to the railway station in the centre of Montpellier. I know you're on a tight budget, so you could get the bus instead of a taxi, but to be honest, I'd advise you against catching the bus. It can be quite unreliable, and it'll only take you as far as the main square, and then it's a bit of a walk to the railway station from there. For the sake of a few euros, it's worth taking a taxi right to the station.
Right, OK, I'll do that.
You'll need to buy a ticket before you get on the train. I think it costs about 25 euros. The last train's due to get in at about 11:30. Because I won't be in Perpignan, I've booked you into a hotel not far from the station.
That's great, thanks.
It's called Le Métropole. I haven't stayed there myself, but one of my friends recommended it to me.
Le Métropole. Right, that sounds good. Thanks.
Now, depending on the weather, you could either take a taxi there or walk from the station. Actually, it's probably best to walk as it's really not far. Don't worry about getting lost. Everyone knows Le Métropole and will be able to give you directions, and there'll still be plenty of people around at that time of night.
OK, that's fine.
It'll be quite late when you arrive, so when you've checked into the hotel, I suggest you get a meal there. The hotel restaurant is very good, and they'll still be serving food at that time. And have whatever you like. I'm paying for your room and the meal.
No, you don't need to do that.
Yes, I want to. It's the least I can do. I'll sort out the bill when I pick you up on Thursday afternoon.
Well, I'll buy you a meal later in the holiday.
All right then. I'll take you up on that.
Fine.
Relax on Thursday morning and walk around town. Perpignan's a lovely place. While you're strolling around, look out for Café Matisse. You might want to try their hot chocolate. It's the best in town. I should be with you at about 2, and I'll meet you in the foyer at Le Métropole.
Oh, sounds wonderful. Thanks for organising that. I'm looking forward to seeing you.
OK, Dan, and I'm really sorry again. Hope the journey goes well, and I'll see you on Thursday.
Great. See you then. Bye. Bye, Jess.
Recording 24B. You'll hear 4 different extracts. For questions 1 to 8, choose the answer A, B or C, which fits best according to what you hear. There are 2 questions for each extract. Extract 1.
Now, Mark Harris, your new book includes some opinions on immunisation that are likely to arouse a strong reaction.
I hope they will. There's an overwhelming picture presented to the public, and that is that immunisation is a safe, scientific procedure which safeguards our health. But this message that is put out by governments, the medical establishment and the media is not supported by fact. Historically, supporters of immunisation have made grandiose claims about its effectiveness, while scientists have distorted the objective evidence to the contrary for fear of going against the mainstream. Very few are prepared to speak out and highlight the findings that much immunisation is not safe in the short term and that the long-term effects of certain forms of immunisation may constitute a major health hazard.
So, in your view, we should stop immunising all children against disease?
No, not at all. The need for immunisation is closely linked to a child's level of well-being. For a child living in hygienic conditions and receiving proper nutrition, immunisation has a minimal effect on the body's ability to fight off disease. But of course, this doesn't apply to a malnourished child living in insanitary conditions who will be less able to fight off disease. And also, there are all shades of variation between these two extremes in both rich and poor countries.
Extract 2.
I first got keen on snowboarding during a skiing holiday in Switzerland when I was about 15. The first couple of hours I spent most of my time on my back. My legs just kept buckling. But it didn't take me long to get fairly good at it, which is the experience most people have. It's no surprise that apparently around 80% of people going to ski slopes for the first time take up snowboarding now rather than skiing. I've got to admit, though, that snowboarding has an image problem among the general public. Snowboarders are very committed to their sport, but people have the impression that we spend most of our time sitting around chatting and having a laugh, rather than being on the slopes. There's a great deal of rivalry between skiers and snowboarders, and skiers are typically not very welcoming to snowboarders. I guess it's to do with who snowboards. It's still very much a young person's sport, whereas skiing is for all the family. So, snowboarders are viewed as pretty wild and crazy people who upset the rather sedate feel of the slopes that skiers have always been used to. But they're just going to have to accept it. Without the money that snowboarders bring in, a number of ski resorts will go out of business.
Extract 3.
It's always difficult when I tell people that no one's handed their property in. I think most of them are secretly convinced I'm hanging on to lost property for myself or selling it off. I do nothing of the sort, of course. Usually, they'll ask me if I'm really sure or say, "Can you have another look for me, please?" It doesn't seem to occur to them that anyone could run off with a coat or a laptop left unattended on a train. People leave some things behind on trains that you really would not believe. You get a load of clothes and umbrellas, of course, the kinds of things you'd expect, but also carpets, vases, lampshades, ironing boards. It's not even as if they're things that are cheap and easy to replace. We've even had animals as well. We had a huge spider once in a shoebox. I really think that people accidentally leave unusual things like this on the train because they don't know how else to get rid of them. You'd think people would be able to give them away or dispose of them in some other way rather than leaving them behind on trains, wouldn't you?
Extract 4.
More and more audio guides are becoming available which you simply download onto your MP3 player and listen to as you walk around a city. I tested 4 of these out in my favourite city, Florence. The first was from City Sounds. I'm afraid I didn't like this. The delivery is terribly deliberate and an occasional change of pace would have been welcome. The effect was closer to someone reading out a guidebook in a rather flat style, rather than a friend showing you around. Frustratingly, it frequently fails to guide you round the interiors of the buildings it takes you to, but wastes time talking about sites that aren't even on the walk. It's professionally produced, though, and considerably cheaper than the others. The second, Walk and Talk, was much better in my view. The polished speaker sounded like an enthusiastic old friend, and the information never felt like a lecture. There's just the right level of detail on the art and architecture you're looking at, and a clever use of a second voice to break in and recount tales about various artists. Very entertaining, although some of those stories sound rather far-fetched. The directions are clear, although the music used to accompany you as you walk wasn't to my taste. Perfect for anyone wanting to get to grips with the history and architecture of Florence. The third guide is one...
Recording 25. Thanks, Kate, for showing us Happening. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about it from students. Sarah, yes, you first.
Where did your idea of a newspaper for teenagers come from?
Well, I used to spend a lot of time reading newspapers when I was at school. But my friends didn't read them much, even though I knew they were concerned about what was going on in the world. So, I suppose the idea of setting up some kind of newspaper for young people came from that time.
Hannah?
Why did you go for an online newspaper?
Well, I did a journalism course at university. I'd also had the opportunity to do a course on website design, and that influenced my decision. It just seemed natural to combine the two. So I designed a prototype of an online newspaper for teens. My main motivation was that I wanted to increase young people's awareness of current affairs. But I also realised that there might be a chance of making it a commercial success. I felt that there was a big demand for an online newspaper aimed specifically at teenagers.
Sarah, your question.
Didn't you need a lot of money to get it started?
Not really, no. I talked to a couple of university friends, and when the course finished, we just went ahead. That's one of the great things about most online business. You don't need huge amounts of money at the outset. But we did need money to live on, of course. We had real difficulty in persuading banks to lend us anything at all. Every bank we approached was sceptical about whether the project would ever make money. But eventually, we managed to borrow some money from parents, and we took the decision to work on it for 6 months. If we weren't making money after that, we'd give the idea up.
Can I ask a question here? How do you actually make money when people don't have to pay to access the site?
All the money comes from advertising. Organisations pay us to put their adverts on the site. When we started, we immediately contacted companies, but it was difficult to generate business at first. They were very wary of advertising with us. But as the number of hits we got started to increase, that's the number of people accessing the site. The number of companies wanting advertising space went up as well.
I see. Thanks. Hannah, you've got another question?
Do you think online newspapers will ever take the place of traditional newspapers?
I doubt it. Being able to access news online is right for some people, but not others. A lot of people want to be able to read a newspaper on the bus or train or at home away from their computer. So, no. I think there'll always be a need for traditional newspapers.
Any more? Tom?
What's been the reaction of teenagers to Happening?
We average about 20,000 hits a day, and the number's steadily growing. We've had an increase of about 50% in the last 3 months alone. When I talk to young people, they seem generally very enthusiastic about the site. And hundreds of comments get posted on our message board each day.
And do many people complain about Happening?
Yes. We get both complaints and praise. In the early days, we used to get quite a lot of complaints about our news coverage because it didn't feature young people's perspectives enough. We've tried to take that on board. So, for example, as you know, a recent big news story has been the protests about the location of a new nuclear power station on the East Coast. As part of this, we covered what school students had been doing to protest. We also occasionally get complaints about how well the website works. Young people demand very high standards nowadays.
Hannah?
Are any young people directly involved in producing Happening?
Yes, young people get the chance to contribute in various ways. For example, we have a reviews section, which is concerned with films, CDs, DVDs and books. All of their reviews are written by young people.
And what future do you see for happening?
That's a good question. First, I'd like to see it expanding. We've decided to include a section on celebrities and also do more on science and technology. For that, though, we need more staff, and that means more money. But the recent increase in hits on the website means that we can charge more for advertising space. So we're quite optimistic about that. More generally, though, politicians seem to be getting interested in happening as a place where young people express their views. If I'm right about this, then young people may be able to have an influence on government policies through happening.
Interesting. Jerry, you've got a question.